Warning, the Savage Nation contains adult language, adult content, psychological nudity. Listener discretion is advised. And now, the world's most exciting podcast, The Savage Nation, home of borders, language, culture. And here he is, New York Times best-selling author and National Radio Hall of Fame inductee, Michael Savage.
Welcome to the free version of the Michael Savage podcast, and I'm going to keep it free for all of you. But there are many of you who would love to be able to listen to my show without any ads. I love ads, but many of you want to listen to the podcast free of ads. So we created something for you, a solution. We call it the Savage Premium. For less than the price of one flat, tasteless beer at your local bar, you can receive access to all of my podcasts going back years, ad-free for just $3.99. That's it, $3.99 a month. You'll get not only my ad-free podcast, but you will also occasionally receive access to material that is exclusive for members only, and I'm going to give you the list in a minute of what you've missed. You're going to get an occasional monologue from me, maybe a reading from one of my novels, sneak peeks of interviews before anyone else hears them, archive pieces dating back to 1994. Many things that come up, you're going to get exclusive access to Michael Savage material. Details can be seen on my website, michaelsavage.com, and if you want to join, all you got to do is go to glow.fm and search Savage Premium. That's glow.fm and search Savage Premium. Now, you will always have access to my free weekly podcast. I want to be clear about that. That's my promise to you. But if you want less ads and more Savage, join the Savage Premium Club today and never miss a spoken word of mine. It's glow.fm/Savage Premium. You can find it on michaelsavage.com. And here's some of the stuff that you have missed so far. Michael Savage reading from his best-selling novel, Countdown to Mecca. My words, my voice. Savage reads from one of his lost journals, Fiji, 1968. Savage's first drive time show, Hour One. My interview with the Jewish gangster, very popular. I read from my first written, published article, Who is at the Helm, from 1965. It's heard nowhere but on my premium site. I read passages from my novel, Abuse of Power. We replayed Fat Al's Tuna. My Savage show from 3/24/94, the earliest show in the archive, 3/24/94. My interview with Donald Trump from 1/10/2011. 1/10/2011, while Mark Levin was mocking him and Sean Hannity was mocking him and the others were mocking him, I was interviewing Trump. Much more. And remember, subscribers also get ad-free podcasts every week. The cost is less than a beer at a bar, and you get a better buzz with the Savage Premium. So go to glow.fm/Savage Premium for full access to ad-free podcasts and exclusive sound you'll not hear anywhere else. Thank you very much.
Do you ever feel lonely? Well, you're not alone.
A new national survey shows that many Americans are lonely.
A condition that is so common, you actually may not think of it as a mental health problem. We're talking about loneliness.
A new study from Cigna says most Americans feel lonely.
Previously published research suggests there could be a link between being lonely and your overall
Loneliness
health.
that's not how that's described in this survey here, where it talks about people, they're among other people, but they just don't feel connected to those folks. They don't have those bonds, or perhaps they feel poorly understood.
All right, welcome to the Michael Savage podcast. Today we're talking about the machinery of loneliness, the weaponization of loneliness, how loneliness is used by governments, how tyrants stoke our fear of isolation to silence, divide, and conquer us. And we're speaking with a great guest, Stella Morabato, on this topic. It's the power of the government to drive us mad into loneliness. And this is perhaps the loneliest time of the year for most Americans. It's after Thanksgiving. It's before Christmas. Many people don't have families anymore, don't see their families. And what we're talking about today is the weaponization of loneliness. And this book, this discussion today on the Michael Savage podcast, offers you the first deep dive into how power elites weaponize the fear of loneliness to enforce social conformity and wage a war on the private sphere of our lives. For example, do you keep your opinions to yourself now because you're afraid people will reject you? Of course you do. Do you sign on to a cause just because everyone around you acts like it's the right thing to do? Of course you do. Well, welcome to the weaponization of loneliness. Tyrants of all stripes want to tell you what to believe and how to live your life. And they get away with it by using the most potent weapon at their disposal, which is your fear of being ostracized. Her book explains how dictators from the French Revolution to the Communist Party of China, I would say even to America today, run by our globalists, atomize us in order to control us. And we fall for it because of our need to connect with others and our fear of social rejection. We are so hardwired to want to fit in that they trigger our conformity impulse. Do I have your attention now? These dynamics are so powerful they can even cause us to comply with evil orders. It's the conformity that I'm talking about. And so we're going to learn how governments socially isolate us, how big tech, big media, big government, academia, Hollywood, and the corporate world exploit our terror of social isolation. You know that's true. We all know that cancel culture is silencing our voices by deplatforming or demonizing us. And we're going to talk about similarities throughout history. Many conservatives in this country are hesitant to express their views. How are we going to change this? Do you believe that such fears are heightened today? I do. We're not just perceiving it. And so we're going to learn about who are the most aggressive of these tyrants and how they do it, and how this nation shifted from being freedom-loving to rule-abiding. We're going to tie it into the French Revolution. We're going to go back to John Dewey and his Humanist Manifesto. We're going to discuss in passing the Frankfurt School, Robespierre, all this and more on the machinery of loneliness with Stella Morabato, on the weaponization of loneliness, on the loneliest time of the year, today and tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, on the one and only Michael Savage Podcast. Thanks for listening. Good morning. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Thank you
for having me.
How long ago did we do the last interview? It was great. I remember that.
Oh, my goodness. It was before the 2020 election.
Oh, my God.
It was like a few months before. And
while I was still on radio interview, I think. Before I was doing podcasts. I don't know. Do you live in the Bay Area?
No, I actually, I'm a transplant to the East Coast from Southern California. I grew up, I was born and raised in a suburb. Well, I was born in Los Angeles. I was raised in a suburb of Los Angeles. I went to the University of Southern California. But then I moved out here in 81. And, that's when I started working at the CIA as an intelligence analyst, especially dealing with issues like media analysis and propaganda.
You come out of the CIA, huh?
Well, that was during the Reagan years, actually. But yes, but it had already. I mean, I already had lots of dealings with people in there who were definitely far left. So it was gone. I mean, it was going back then. But in any case, I was still focused on like Soviet media. What came out of Pravda and all that, and analyzing that sort of stuff and disinformation, all that. And so then, later on, I started a family, had kids. I ended up, staying home, raising my family. But I was really zeroing in on all of these things, all of these agendas in the United States. So you've been deeply, deeply, deeply involved and a student of this digression from our basic founding principles, especially those of individual liberty and freedom, to put it in very, very basic, simple terms. Do you say, though, that we know there's a reaction to the push against those of us who are still individuals? I mean, you stand up to them. The school board show the average people will also have a breaking point and stand up to them. Do you think it's enough people standing up to actually reverse what's going on? Well, at the moment, you need more. But as if people can let go of that, because there's really not a lot to lose at this point. You feel like you have a lot to lose if they're going to be platformed or lose your job or whatever. But ultimately, if you end up in a state of solitary confinement, there really isn't much to lose by speaking up. But, you use your judgment. But if enough people, do that and embolden others, it creates, and this is what the left, or you call power elites, are so fearful of. They are extremely fearful of an opinion cascade that turns on them. And how does that happen? It happens through the private sphere. It happens through actual conversation and witnessing people who stand up to this stuff. I mean, if you, I have a section in my book where I talk about the conformity impulse and all the science and research that was done, especially in the 1950s, starting with Solomon Asch, where people were fearful of giving the wrong answer or giving the correct answer for the length of the line because everybody else was giving the incorrect answer. So they went along with it. And later on, he had a student named Stanley Milgram who did those famous shock experiments to show that, no, the Americans were not immune to this Nazi kind of dynamic.
I remember.
And so... But what the interesting thing, going back to Solomon Asch, is he did a variation on his line experiment where people would just pretend they would go along with the crowd about something like the length of a line. They gave the wrong answer just because everybody else was giving the wrong answer.
Unbelievable.
Nothing political about it. They were just didn't want to be in the minority.
Yes.
Well, he did a variation on that experiment, which was really interesting. He gave the subject a partner. There was one of the Confederates of the experiment would give the correct answer. And they go down the line. Everybody else gave the incorrect answer. And the subject, knowing that he had a partner, the conformity dropped like a rock because he knew there was one other person there who agreed with him.
So if there's one person willing to stand up to the tyranny that we are experiencing, there'll be more than one. Others will stand up with that person.
They should. Yeah, you can create these cascades. And that's what the power elites are so afraid of. That's why they keep pushing for censorship and misinformation governance boards. They don't want people sharing facts and sharing
misinformation
truth.
Governance boards on all the social media. Interesting. Misinformation governance boards. Isn't that something? It's a great topic. Stella Morabito on the weaponization of loneliness. How tyrants stoke our fear of isolation to silence, divide, and conquer. Loneliness is the new epidemic, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Well, before COVID, there were all kinds of headlines about a loneliness epidemic and deaths of despair and all of the mental health issues that went along with it, as well as physical health issues. I mean, severe social isolation creates all kinds of stress that can lead to all kinds of physical ailments as well. But COVID just fast-tracked it all and enforced our isolation.
So it's a book that you wrote on the weaponization of loneliness?
Yes, it's a book that's been in the making for a while. I've always been intrigued with issues of psychological manipulation and psychological warfare. And I was looking for like a common denominator, a common thread that ties together all of the really awful agenda items that come to pass. And that's really what it is. When we self-censor, when people shut up about what they believe or they lie about what they believe in order to avoid that threat of ostracism or their fear of being rejected, that's what gives oxygen to all the bad agendas and all the bad events that have taken place in history.
Well, it certainly comes to mind the minute you say that is the masks that we were forced to put on, the social distancing, the loss of socialization from what went on for 2 years. And many people are looking back and saying it was unnecessary to the extent that it was imposed upon us. What's interesting to me, many people are calling it a pandemic. I don't want to go into that part of it. We know what the pandemic has done to the world, drive people apart, put us in our own little houses. We're afraid to even shake someone's hand, have dinner with them. I have a friend who will still not go to a restaurant, and she's not a dumb person. She's afraid to be in a restaurant.
Michael Savage, a host like no other.
Hey, Savage listeners, I want to tell you about Kachava, my team's daily super blend. If you're like me, trying to stay on top of your health and get all your nutrients, then please listen, because Kachava has you covered. Kachava puts everything your body needs in one glass. All the superfoods, all the protein, all the greens, all the vitamins, all the omegas, all the benefits for your brain, your gut, your skin, your muscles, your heart, your whole health. No more compromise, no more guilt. No other nutritional shake does all this. They travel to the ends of the earth to source all the most powerful superfoods, and they crush them up. It's so simple. You take 2 scoops of powder, you add water, you blend it up, and you enjoy it. You're going to be surprised how good it actually tastes. My team drinks Kachava for breakfast, and they tell me they have energy all day long and they feel great. You've got to go try Kachava for yourself. Right now, they've got a special offer for my listeners. Go to Kachava.com/savage. That's Kachava, Kachava, Kachava.com/savage. You're going to get 10% off your first order. That's Kachava.com/savage.
Loneliness is defined as a feeling of being alone or lacking social connectedness. Other research has shown as well that loneliness impacts heart disease, diabetes, depression, substance use, and overall feelings of health.
You say in your book how dictators from the French Revolution to the Communist Party of China to today's globalists aim to atomize us in order to control us. Now, I know that goes on here, but I'm curious about your statement about the French Revolution, because I've always been fascinated by the history of that revolution and what it's done to the world until today, whether it be the revolution that followed, the revolutions that followed in the Soviet Union or in Cambodia, all modeled on the French Revolution. And we have a mini French Revolution going on in America today, in my opinion. I don't know if you agree with that, but it looks very much like it to me. But tell me about the French Revolution. How did they isolate people there?
Well, part of the thesis of my book includes something I call the machinery of loneliness, which is used to kind of using or exploiting the fear, the primal fear of social isolation in order to trigger the conformity impulse and trigger compliance.
Got it.
And this machinery, in my view, includes what I call the 3-legged stool of tyranny. And they didn't use these terms during the French Revolution, but they all existed. Identity politics, political correctness, and especially mob agitation to enforce it all, to enforce compliance. So they had this, the Jacobin reign of terror developed this de-Christianization campaign where they started by they were going to create this new utopia, this so-called Republic of Virtue, based on, all the Enlightenment ideas of reason and science and all this stuff. And but in order to do that, they had to wipe out the old, just like Mao talked about wiping out the old.
Sounds very much like occasional cortex in our cohorts today. That's exactly the model they're following, isn't it?
Very much so. I mean, identity politics can be just, something as, quote, simple as saying, hey, you're an enemy of the people. You're an enemy of the revolution. Today, we have all kinds of it's all based on demonization and, oppressor versus victim and, and then demonizing people with labels.
Well, the FBI has said the greatest threat to America is white supremacy. They're still following that in the U.S. military. How is this even possible to go on?
I know. I mean, at some point it'll all implode. The question is how much damage gets done.
Well, I wrote a book called Stop Mass Hysteria, and I've studied some of these movements, and they all usually burn out. But the question is, how long does it take for it to burn out, and how much damage is done before it burns out? Isn't that the
absolutely? Yeah. Absolutely. So, they use all these components like identity politics where they smear. You use the term white supremacist. That's, that really triggers. Nobody wants to be called, a white supremacist or a bigot or, any of the other
or
terms.
MAGA. They're using it on MAGA. Biden's saying not all Republican voters are MAGers. He doesn't mean MAGers. We're MAGers. But anyone who's a real MAGer, according to Biden, is the enemy of America. It's not Black Lives Matter, who burned cities to the ground, whole sections of cities to the ground. It's not Antifa who did all the damage. It's those who believe in borders, language, and culture, nationalists, in other words. They're the real enemy to these globalists.
Right, because if people are allowed to have real conversations, that gets in the way of their agendas. And identity politics, political correctness, which is basically the instrument that's used to induce self-censorship. And then...
well, sure, people walk around. I know friends. I live in a very liberal county outside of San Francisco. I've been socially isolated from the time I moved here, but I've never left because I love nature. I love the water, and they're not going to take that away from me. So I've learned to live without a social life per se, and it's become second nature to me because I'm very internal anyway. I'd rather be left alone with my own thoughts or with nature rather than worrying about what people think of me. But it has a tremendous effect on a person to go in a restaurant and have to control what you're saying. Or people look at you like you're the bad guy because you believe in America. You're the bad guy because you're a Republican in a 90% Democrat county. You're no good.
The Savage Nation. It's Savage on Demand.
Hey, will a lack of a red wave during the midterms lead to a more emboldened Biden? More wasteful government spending? Higher taxes? How would you protect your hard-earned savings from the reinvigorated left? The answer, gold. Gold is the world's oldest, most proven form of currency. It's there for you when inflation soars, when other assets go sideways. And that's why Birch Gold is so thrilled to introduce a new product that reimagines gold as currency, the Goldback. This month, you'll get a free gold back for every $5,000 purchased when you convert an existing IRA or 401k into a precious metals IRA with Birch Gold by December 22nd. Birch Gold will help you own gold and silver in a tax-sheltered account. Text SAVAGE to 989-898 to claim your free info kit on gold. Then talk to one of their precious metals specialists. Plus, with every purchase you make before December 22nd, you'll get a free gold back. This is a great stocking stuffer, just in time for Christmas. Once again, text SAVAGE to 989-898. Protect your savings with gold today and get a free gold back. Once again, text SAVAGE to 989-898. Protect your savings with gold today.
Many of us are, at least sometimes, are feeling quite lonely. And many people actually are always feeling quite lonely, which is really important. It has physical health ramifications, mental health ramifications. And you could say that this rises to the level of true public health concern.
There was an interesting article that says it all, Stella, the other day. The day after the Republicans had this one vote majority in the House, the New York Times comes out the next morning with the country's about to go into gridlock, and the agenda, the important agenda, is now going to be held in abeyance. I said, are they crazy? They're arguing for a one-party system without even understanding. They're calling for totalitarianism. I think that goes to the core of your discussion in a way, doesn't it?
Yes. No, they're calling for the end of real conversation. And just as Hannah Arendt wrote in her book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, tyrants always need a sense of isolation to render people powerless when they feel disconnected from others or threatened to be disconnected. That's how people are more easily controlled, is when they're isolated. And you'll see this with even like cult leaders like Jim Jones. The first thing they do is they isolate their recruits. And in order to better propagandize them, and they affect any other old relationships. What
comes to mind is there's a series on TV now about that Keith guy who's in prison now, who ran that cult. What cult? What is his name? But he would isolate people. He had this huge following of devotees from Hollywood. Some people came from wealthy families, including the heiress to the Seagram's fortune, Bronfman. You know who I'm talking about? That Keith guy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But he would isolate people who would. He would isolate them if they had all defied him in any way, He'd put them in a room and say, you've really violated the rules and you have to stay there until you're ready to come out. And one woman was in a room for 2 years.
Oh, my goodness.
This is what he did.
Very demoralizing. In fact, that is the essence.
Keith Raniere.
Okay, I can't really see. Oh, okay. What was that?
Keith Raniere. Oh, this goes right to the core of your argument.
Yeah.
Now it rings a bell. Yeah, he's not that well known in general conversation, but he was an example today of that kind of tyrannical cult leader on the order of a Jim Jones. He didn't give them Kool-Aid and kill them, but he molested or had sex with most of them. He branded them. Stella, he branded them. He had a doctor brand the inner thigh of the women, burn their flesh. And when a woman would object, he would say to them, you don't want to burn for me?
It's horrible. Now, this is a standard operating procedure of any kind of control freak. And they may not know consciously that is, how they operate in terms of, isolating people in order to control them. But it is something that they would know instinctively, even if they don't know it consciously. And it's really the essence of what we call Stockholm syndrome, to try to get the captive to bond with the captor. And in all these radical utopian revolutions, we see that that's really the goal, is to get people to bond with the mass state instead of families, friends, faith communities, or, really true communities.
As humans, we're social animals. We're just, the naked ape. We're basically the naked ape. Desmond Morris wrote that book so many years ago. But apes are social creatures. They need to run in packs. So does man. Basically, we're not made to be alone. It's not a natural state for a person to be alone. So you take the Christian faith, it has a congregation. The Jewish faith has a thing called a minyan, where 10 men, a minyan of 10, would get together every morning to pray. That was a way of taking people away from the isolationism of the village life or whatever it might have been. That was all gone during COVID. They closed the churches in California and let the strip clubs stay open under this governor. I'm curious. You say you write about tyrants telling us how to live our lives. Who are the worst aggressors in this age? I mean, I would think North Korea would be on the top of the list. Well,
yeah, if you're looking at, world-class dictatorships, North Korea, which they call it the hermit kingdom because it's so isolated. People don't really have access to any other ideas, any other thoughts. It's totally propagandized, and it's got a very hardcore social credit system, which China has, of course, but it's existed, I think, a lot longer in North Korea.
Social credit system, what is that?
That's where your access to all goods and services, education, housing, even food, but your job, whether or not you can even own a pet, all of those things are based on your compliance, your political compliance.
Who judges whether you do the right thing? Who
decides? I mean, it's just whoever, this little core, this oligarchy, whoever.
So they have little cadres running around in villages who give people social credits based upon their conformity to the government's edicts.
Well, yes? And the way it works the way it works in China is you actually have a point system where, if you lose points, you gain points. They've got I don't know how many million, facial recognition cameras, but are we
on the road to that here in America?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Well, the universities certainly practice it. The cancel culture is certainly a big part of that,
right? And also
getting rid of professors, distinguished professors, for one word they don't like because one girl in the class became hysterical.
Yeah. It's censorship from the top down is really what will get us there. Well, what gets us to censorship from the top down is self-censorship through political correctness. When we shut up about what we believe or lie about what we believe, we pave the way, we cultivate the ground for a top-down censorship system, like they're calling for what do they call it, misinformation governance?
you're making me feel somewhat hopeless about the future. If we keep going down this road, it's all over. I mean, we're pretty far gone. We know that. Any kid who stands out I have a friend that has a kid who's 13 years old, and my friend, is not super conservative. He's more of a moderate guy, but his son had to do a class piece on something about what is a nation. What is a nation? So you said, my son Isaac is going to talk about borders, language, and culture. He's going to use your phrase, Michael. I said, oh, watch out. Dan, watch out for that one. Mm-hmm. Well, I said, why doesn't he define it as something else? He said, no, he's not afraid of them. Well, he got a D on the exam. The teacher gave him a D and ostracized them for saying you can't define a nation by its borders, language, and culture. So there it is, a 13-year-old.
In other words, you can't express yourself. You can't discover ideas and express ideas.
Well, you can if they're degenerated ideas, and if your mind is fully tattooed.
But that's not really expressing an idea. I mean, if you're just parroting back, right? Parroting back the propaganda.
Stella, you must have an interesting background. I'd like to digress for a minute. How did you, as an author, is that your profession, author, or is there another profession behind author?
No, well, right now, that's what I do. I write, as you may know. I'm a senior contributor to The Federalist. And before I wrote this book, The Weaponization of Loneliness.
Oh, that's a good picture.
Yeah.
We better make sure my producer gets that. We'll use it on the podcast.
Yeah,
cover.
That is the cover has Anthony Fauci in a vintage TV.
I love that picture.
He represents the weaponization of loneliness, the enforcement of isolation.
Yeah, well, he sure got away with it for quite a while.
Well, and I fear still is. But, you said this looks very hopeless. And sure, I mean, this is kind of the default position of man. As you said, we're social creatures. We really can't survive in isolation. So that's part of that's in severe isolation we can't. So that's part of why we're hardwired to connect with other people. But at the flip side of that is we have a very primal fear of being ostracized or separated, and that is even worse in today's environment where the family is so broken and you don't have that private sphere of life to fall back on as easily, children especially today.
Well put. The Savage Nation. It's savage, uncut, unfiltered, and raw.
The Air Traffic Out of Control podcast has landed. Each week you can hear crazy, funny, and downright nerve-wracking audio from airport control towers around the globe.
Well, we're outside here. They're saying the ramp is closed. They won't let us park because of Air Force One.
It's Tower 192. There apparently is a passenger opened up an overwing exit and is now on the wing attempting to jump. Can you alert police, please?
Real audio from pilots and air traffic controllers.
You absolutely need to maintain radio silence if it's not ATC related. You're an obstruction to air traffic control. Otherwise, we can file some paperwork.
Air Traffic Out of Control is now available wherever you get your podcasts. Don't miss it.
The fear of loneliness is superseded by the fear of being ostracized, which is worse than being alone. Right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's not the same as solitude. Let's just call it like involuntary solitude. I mean,
involuntary solitude. It's like solitary confinement.
Right. I mean, where you're cut off from humanity. I mean, that's how it feels.
You're making me say I better reach out and create a social group. I've got to tell you something. Guess what I did? I moved to California in 1974, and I found the people to be strange. I had come from New York, and there was a thing called vacuousness that was rampant in San Francisco. You talk to people and they wouldn't look at you. They would look over there. They would look over there. And then I met someone in the streets of North Beach, a good looking young guy who cracked up after 2 years from, I don't know where he was, Eastern Europe. And he started wandering the streets saying, there's no continuum. There's no continuum. There's no continuum. I said, what are you talking about? He said, there's nothing here. There's no continuum, meaning there's no continue. He came from a country where people talk to each other. I came from a New York where people communicated with each other. You knew what people thought. They would tell you. Here, people were in the 70s afraid to communicate what they thought for fear of being ostracized by the pack. And look where we are today, right? So it got so bad for me that I created a digital community called the Savage Nation on the radio. And that became a world I created. That was my community. And every day I'd speak with my world for 3 hours a day, and I felt part of something enormous. And it was something enormous. I literally created a digital nation. So what's interesting, Stella, is I'm now doing podcasts. I don't speak to an audience. I speak to a microphone, occasionally a guest as intelligent as yourself. Other than that, it's pretty isolated doing podcasts. You're talking to yourself, by and large.
Well, that's a digital world, and it does have an isolating effect. I do discuss that a little bit in my book. Well, actually, quite a bit in that first part. That there are three things that are different from the utopian revolutions of the past compared to where we are today. And one is that it's global in scope, but the second one, which you touch on with doing the podcast and feeling isolated talking to a microphone, is that the communications technologies have exponentially taken off. And you probably have read some of the headlines about how this has affected youth, who are just so connected with their devices. They're so.
But Stella, here's the strange part. I get up in the morning. I can't wait to go on social media. I cannot wait to communicate on Twitter and or Facebook with the stuff I post and the reactions I get. I actually read them and respond to some of them. It's a community. It's real. In other words, it's not fake. If someone reads what you wrote and responds to what you wrote with something they write, it is a form of communication. I mean, it doesn't have the visceral nature of two people talking, but it's still a community. So it can't be totally disavowed as meaningless.
Yeah, no, it's not. No, I'm not saying it's meaningless. I'm just saying that there is a layer of connection that is lost. I mean, we could say lost. That doesn't mean that you're not connected. I mean, I talk on the phone to people I love and I feel connected. I'm so glad that the phone is there because there's 3,000 miles between us. I'm not saying that there's no disconnect. I'm just saying it's not the same as real life, face-to-face.
Of course not.
Connection.
Sitting and having a meal, breaking bread with someone.
Right.
To make it very primal to the monkey thing again, when you're next to a person, you can scent them. You smell them. I mean, I'm not making it a negative thing.
Yeah.
A person has a scent. When I lost my brother when I was very young, I had the scent of my brother for years. I'd go in his drawers and smell the clothing that he left behind that was washed. Because the scent is such a profound element of the human being, the totality of the being. We hear and we see, but we smell. And even if we kiss someone in a non-romantic way, which is very customary in Eastern Europe, by the way, a man kisses his son, a son kisses his father when they meet each other, or the Italian with a kiss on the cheek. They're basically tasting each other in a crazy way.
Yeah, that's a tactile sense.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I'm not saying we have to go back, 300 years or 200 years, but we need to be aware of how these new technologies affect us, and especially how they're affecting youth. I mean, there's been studies and research done on some of the disconnect. They're becoming deeper and deeper into that virtual world to the point that they can't even have face-to-face conversations anymore.
Well, look at these crypto crooks, these kids. They look like they're all amoral and asocial. This group that just ripped off these billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And the head of this crypto theft group had something strange to say. He said, this whole thing about ethics, this Western thing about ethics and values, it's really stuck in the past. It's meaningless.
Wow. Now, I didn't hear that except just now from you, that quote.
Oh, my
and
God.
It's mind-blowing because what it really means is that there should be, as though there shouldn't be any kind of a moral ground on which to walk, on which to think. And of course that, it's like a nothingness, just as you said before. There's no continuum there. There's no continuum. There's no anchor. And
I found the exact quote for you. Here it is.
Okay.
Bankman-Fried, who to me is the greatest con man in my lifetime, he exceeds Madoff. Bankman-Fried, in the interview, unleashed a tirade against regulators. He called ethics, quote unquote, a dumb game we woke Westerners play.
Wow. He's
the son of 2 Stanford law professors.
Well, there you go.
And his girlfriend, and they were both high on amphetamines most of the time, by the way, like Hitler's troops. They loved the amphetamines. They said it gave them clarity. So they're amoral millennial types, drug addicts, ripped everybody off, and laughed at anyone who had a sense of ethics.
And you know what I would add to that list? Even though it doesn't quite fit in there, but I think it's very true. They're also isolated. They would deny it because they still communicate supposedly with people. But isolation can create that sense of no continuum, that sense of, you're unmoored from reality already. So you don't even know that it's necessary for you to have any kind of roots. So
you talk about, your book is the weaponization of loneliness,
right,
which is the key question here. Is the key point really is the word weaponization.
Right.
We know that Joe Biden has been the worst of all modern presidents in weaponizing, in my opinion, weaponizing loneliness and isolation by calling anyone who doesn't agree with his political orientation, which we all know what that is, as a bad person. This is coming up right from the campuses into Joe Biden's brain. Here's the president of the United States saying, if you're a MAGA, you're basically the most gravest threat to this society. It's hard to believe. It's hard to believe when you think about it.
Well, that's, he's condemned half of America. And probably
he said regular Republicans aren't bad. He just said those who really believe in anything are the bad ones.
Well, what he means are Republicans who vote for him.
Good. Yeah, I get it.
But that's what he means. It's and when it reaches that level where the president himself, as sentient as he may or may not be, states that half the country is, somehow anti-democracy. That's just all part and parcel of a vast demonization campaign. You can't call it anything else. It's right there. Nobody can deny that.
Home of borders, language, culture, the Savage Nation.
So your book is about basically the weaponization, which is the demonization. Was there a point when the country, in your mind, shifted from loving the individualism, respecting individuals, when the country shifted from a freedom-loving country to one of such conformity?
Oh, man, that is a hard one to pinpoint. I mean, I'm sure you're very well aware of the Frankfurt School and cultural Marxism that planted down roots at Columbia University almost 100 years ago, and had the idea that the war was not really economic, it was cultural, and they were going to do this long march through the institutions, which of course has come to pass. That's been going on for a very long time. The subversion of education. I mean, you could go back to even before John Dewey talked about education as something you just have to use it to kind of socially engineer the population. Pick winners and losers in the school and all that. It wasn't about real education. It was about creating this sort of utopian society.
But it's funny you mentioned John Dewey.
But pardon me?
It's funny you mentioned John Dewey. I was making notes and I said Robespierre would be one of the architects of this.
Yeah.
Okay. But then I remember when I entered Queens College in the City University of New York, it was in 1959. I was 16 years old or something like that. I didn't know politics at all. I had no idea anything. I really knew nothing about politics. My parents were immigrants. My father read 5 newspapers. He never went to beyond high school, but he was a well-read man in terms of newspapers, 5 newspapers a day. And I'd say to him, Dad, why are you reading 5 newspapers? He said, because they all have different opinions and I want to draw my own, what I want to make up my own mind. So he was a very smart man in that regard. But so I get to college and I take a course in education. And the books that they were using were the teachings of John Dewey. I didn't know he was part of the school you're discussing. I thought he was John Dewey. He sounds like a great guy. It's an American name. His name is John and it's Dewey. He sounds like a good guy and he's teaching good stuff. But he was actually teaching what you're saying. He's a descendant of the Frankfurt School.
Well, yeah, he had this, I forgot what it was called, some kind of a treatise on religion as well, Humanist Manifesto that he signed in 1933 that we had to move away from traditional religion and
oh boy, that's true.
And so he was really heavy duty, into what today they call progressivism.
Wow.
And it was and a lot of so-called educators, I think even including folks like Bill Ayers, looked to him as kind of a model. I could be wrong about Bill Ayers, but a lot of the radical so-called educators, educrats, I would call them, are look to him as sort of the model, the beginning of a lot of that. But the turning point itself, getting back to your original question. When did this shift happen? I think it happened most dramatically after a few years of the internet. Everybody thought the internet would bring us together, or we could talk to people all over the world and all that. But it also gave the opportunity for big tech, once they got total control over it, to try to control the narrative and the conversation. And then that, propagandizing, when you don't hear any other point of view, it has a very corrupting influence, but very isolating as well. And one other thing I would add, I'm kind of going off in different directions here, but I think it's really important to add that ignorance itself is extremely isolating. If you think about how the schools aren't really providing content knowledge or not really satisfying natural curiosity for young children. They're just off on this, kind of indoctrination routine with all of these, gender theory and gender ideology.
Look what they're doing to parents who stand up for traditional family or parental rights. They're calling them bad names. The FBI is breaking down their doors or investigating them. Mm-hmm. They're sending a tax squad to a Christian pastor who opposes this LGBTQ propaganda. I don't know how much worse it could get than this on the Biden. It's gotten so terrible. So your book is called The Weaponization of Loneliness.
Yeah.
How Tyrants Stoke Our Fears of Isolation to Silence, Divide, and Conquer Us. And you explain how dictators from the French Revolution to even to today, whether it's here or in China, aim to atomize us in order to control us. And how it's in violation, basically, of our need to connect with others and our fear of social rejection.
Michael Savage, a host like no other.
Are there any further thoughts that you would like to add at this time, Stella?
Well, the term weaponization, I don't know that I, clarified that, but weaponization of loneliness basically means exploiting that primal fear of ostracism, using it to trigger the conformity impulse that will allow these bad agendas to go forward and turn into bad policies. Mm-hmm. And then I also want to add, you said, oh, wow, it sounds so hopeless. And, we do have a lot of work to do. There's no question about that. Things that, it's a tall order getting back to, when we understood and appreciated our rights as individuals under the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment right to free speech. And I think the key is understanding, first of all, that free speech is a use it or lose it proposition. It's hard to speak out a lot of times, but even one-on-one, if you can gently express what you believe, quite often you might be surprised that you've emboldened a like-minded thinker. We don't really necessarily know what other people believe in this kind of an environment when everybody's shut up and everybody's fearful of opening their mouths. And then the other thing is you can't have a private sphere of life without freedom of expression. You can't have relationships without freedom of expression, period. And so this is really a war on the private sphere of life. And it's an old war. It goes back to the French Revolution and the Bolsheviks and Mao and so on. There's nothing new about it. It's almost like the default, position of, human interaction. And the totalitarian impulse is like almost they have a sort of a superhuman stamina in pushing these, like the Great Reset and all these.
I know they don't stop. They're relentless. It's wherever you turn. Yeah. This social conformity comes at me everywhere I look. Mm-hmm. And it's so much worse today than at any time in my many years because of social media. And only since Musk took over Twitter have I seen people expressing themselves again more or less freely. Mm-hmm. I mean, my audience went up by 10%. The shadow banners who are watching it, whether through algorithms or they had that many people could watch certain people who were prominent with a large following and literally control how many statements I could make and what I could say, how many could reply with shadow blocking, shadow banning. These people were so bad, Stella, they hired third world people who came from countries without a First Amendment to control those of us with a First Amendment. So now Musk takes over Twitter and they're calling him every bad name under the sun because he wants to take people out of Twitter prison. This is how bad this has become.
Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen with Twitter and Musk and all of that.
Nobody
anybody's
does.
Guess. But it's extremely important, in my view, that we guard and actually try to cultivate real life conversations that are open. I think people are really hungering for that. People are starving for that, but they're too scared. And it's just a matter of building that private sphere that's been under attack. I think I don't know if you're aware of that essay. I bring it up a lot in my book, and I brought it up in other interviews. An essay, very famous essay written in 1978, Samizdat, underground essay by Václav Havel, who was a dissident in Soviet Czechoslovakia. Later, after the Berlin Wall fell, he became the president of the Czech Republic. But it was called The Power of the Powerless. And his central point was that all of our real power, and this is why power elites are after our personal relationship, all of our real power comes from that private sphere. It comes from family, faith communities, friendships, real community. And if that can be, if that can be cultivated and it can ripple out and create a cascade of freedom. But it has to start.
When you speak, as you're saying this, The Power of the Powerless by Pavel, I remember reading it years and years ago. I'm thinking again of the school board meetings where the community actually gets together and says, no, you're not teaching my child that they're no good because they're white. No, you're not teaching my children to become transgender. And they're considered the enemies of the school board, and they call the police to throw them out of there.
Right.
This is out of a totalitarian state.
Right.
What is going on under this country, in this country right now. So the last question, I think that we could wrap it up with, you've studied this much more intently than I have. I intuitively have lived with this my whole life, which is why I created the Savage Nation radio show 26 years, why I still do podcasts when I don't need to. It's my way of communicating. Why I'm on social media talking to phantoms, tilting at windmills, actually. Every time I do it, I say, Michael, you're really tilting at windmills here. They're not real. I mean, they may be real people, but you're tilting at windmills. Again, there's no humanity there. Nothing. The humanity is missing. What's the hope for the country?
Well, the hope for the country is that people are waking up. I mean, you know, when you have parents called domestic terrorists by the administration, I don't really see them shirking. I mean, you know, they are infuriated. I think
they're more agitated now than before,
yes,
I think.
And that's a hopeful sign. You know, like, who the hell are you to call me a domestic terrorist because I want to raise my own child? And you know, I don't want you telling me that, you know, you're going to, quote, parent my child in school. So this really, but it also has the effect of clarifying to us how important that private sphere is. These school boards, I mean, they're like robots. If you've ever, I've spoken before school boards before. I mean, they, and you know, especially in, you know, these blue areas, but they all just kind of sit there like zombies, really. I mean, they'll shut you off. They'll shut off your mic.
Well, Stella Morabato, the book is The Weaponization of Loneliness. I do remember that you were with us in the CIA. I remember the first time we talked now. Well, Stella, thank you for your remarkable work.
Well, thank you. It's
a big topic. It's a true topic. And I wouldn't say it's a hopeless topic. You've given me some idea that I need to, you know, sometimes I say to myself, I'm making it very personal. Why am I still doing this? Why do I get up and tilt at windmills every day and still do podcasts? Why do I still do social media? What am I doing it for? And the answer is because there's no other way of life for me. I've been so much an outsider standing up to authority my whole life. I've always been a rebel, I guess. And when I say rebel, it's not rebel for no reason. It's like rebel with a cause, not rebel without a cause.
Yeah.
And I would say that all of us have to become rebels with a cause.
Yep. I think you stated it right there.
Thank you so much for your work. I appreciate it very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Keep fighting. Keep fighting.
And thank you.
Okay.
You too.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Rebels with a cause. Well, thank you very much for listening to today's podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it and you'll learn something from it. We have about 400 other episodes available for you to listen to absolutely free. You can go back into our vast library of podcasts and listen to any one of them at any time. And remember this, if you want to listen to my podcast ad-free, sign up for the Savage Premium membership and get access to ad-free podcasts as well as some premium content from our Savage archives. How do you sign up for those ad-free podcasts? Please visit michaelsavage.com for a link. Again, thank you for your listenership. This is Michael Savage.
The Air Traffic Out of Control podcast has landed. Each week you can hear crazy, funny and downright nerve-wracking audio from airport control towers around the globe.
Well, we're outside here. They're saying the ramp is closed. They won't let us park because of Air Force One.
In Tower 192, there apparently is a passenger opened up an overwing exit and is now on the wing attempting to jump. Can you alert police, please?
Real audio from pilots and air traffic controllers.
You absolutely need to maintain radio silence if it's not ATC related. You know, obstruction to air traffic control. Otherwise, we can file some paperwork.
Air Traffic Out of Control is now available wherever you get your podcasts. Don't miss it.